This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Let me get that. Whoa. All right. You ready, Andrew? Okay. So welcome everyone to Genre Stories. This month of May are legends, urban and traditional. We have 7 storytellers that have been nominated from the Story Swap group throughout California. And all of them except 5 of the 7 have told stories with us before. And I can guarantee you that it's going to be a fantastic evening of storytelling with all of these storytellers. So let me introduce our first storyteller. Her name's Claire Castell. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
All right. And Claire is fairly new to this whole genre compared to some of us old timers. She retired in 2017 and got into storytelling through Stagebridge. And if any of you don't know what Stagebridge is, it's a community that does storytelling workshops and trainings and all kinds of different things, mostly for adult audiences.
Seniors.
We get a lot of outstanding storytellers from that organization. And if any of you are interested, you can go to Stagebridge and look them up and see about all the classes that they have to offer. I asked people to tell me something weird about them or interesting, and Claire just happened to say that she has a collection of stories, and she's entitled them "My Life of Debauchery." I'm excited. Maybe we're going to hear one of those stories tonight. And
Not tonight.
She also started a group in Rossmore where she lives called the Rossmore Storytelling Club. And she's been running that for about a year, and they're having their meetings and gatherings, and I think it's going to be a very successful group in our Story Swap organization throughout California. So please welcome Claire Castell.
Hi, everybody. Well, this tonight is about legends, urban and traditional, but I've always loved urban legends. So I searched and searched for an urban legend to tell. And I finally got to the point where I said, what's better than one urban legend, but more than one urban legend? So there's going to be a test, and you can tell me at the end how many urban legends you recognize in this story. And of course, this is a true story. I know it's true because my next door neighbor, his brother-in-law, heard it from his yoga teacher, and she had a twin sister who knew Larry's mother. And this story is called Larry and Susan Go for a Ride. So about 5 years ago, a UC Berkeley student named Larry was feeling really lonely. And then his buddy came up and said, hey, there's a big party down on Fraternity Row. Let's go down there and have some fun. There are going to be a lot of medical students, and they always have the best drugs. Want to go? Larry says, hell yeah. So true to the prediction, there was a lot of medical students at this party, and they were going full blast. Now, Larry noticed a pretty woman kind of standing by herself in a long yellow dress, kind of like a granny dress by herself. But she was quite lovely. And Larry couldn't take his eyes off of her, and he mustered up his courage and walked over and introduced himself. He started a conversation with Susan, and they had fun talking. And finally, Larry says, how about we go take a ride to Grizzly Peak in the Berkeley Hills? She agreed. So as they're driving up the hills, let me get some water. Susan commented on his expensive vintage car. She says, I know you're just a student. How can you afford this beautiful red Corvette? It looks like it's from the 80s. Well, it's a 1983, as a matter of fact, V8. Funny story. Last year, I needed a car and I saw this ad. It said Corvette, low mileage, bright red, 83 model, 65 bucks. Now, of course, I was sure that was a mistake and they were going to say some exponentially larger number when I called. But the woman said, no, that's right. Come on over. And he did. And it was spotless. But Larry said, I had to ask what was wrong with the car. How can you sell it for that price? And the woman selling the car says, well, my husband of 30 years has just left me for a woman half his age at the office. They ran off to the Caribbean, but this high life doesn't run cheap. So he emailed me and said, I need money. Would you please sell my car and send me the money? So this $65 here, this is going to him and his bimbo. Well, by then, Larry and Susan pulled up to the lookout point and parked the car. There was a full moon. It illuminated the bay and San Francisco itself. It was a little bit cold, so Larry gave Susan his old worn leather jacket and they turned on the radio. Susan likes oldies, so she turned on an Eagles song, Hotel California. And they snuggled a bit and, he's leaning in for the kiss. And then suddenly, blah, 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 a safety alert blares on the radio. A dangerous medical patient broke out of the county hospital for the criminally insane, last seen in the Berkeley Hills. Beware, consider him armed and dangerous. Well, actually, he only has one arm, the other one's a hook. So please stay inside. And so Susan is frightened. And Larry's kind of still trying to go for the big move, which I think I hear something. We better get out of here. Can we please go? He says, well, where do you live? She says, I'm on Cedar down at Milvia, that big gray house. So they peel out and they head down to Cedar. But suddenly at Shattuck Avenue, a big black SUV runs a light and almost hits them. Now, it was such a close call. Larry pulls over. He's shaken and he looks over and sees Susan. Susan's disappeared. She's not here. Now, how is that possible? He's looking around. He drives the car around to see if she jumped out or fell out. Where the heck is Susan? Now he starts to think, well, maybe she's playing a joke on me. I bet she went to that party and she's laughing there with a bunch of medical students. So he goes back there and looks around and sits down for a few drinks. And the medical students do indeed have a lot of good drugs, and they say, come over here, Larry, I got something for you. Next thing Larry knows, it's morning and he's laying in a bathtub full of ice. He's groggy, but he sees a lipstick message on the mirror over the sink. It says, call 911. And somebody left a cell phone right on the edge of the tub. So he calls 911. Stay here, don't move. I'm sending the paramedics right now. I know where you are. This has happened a number of times. Have you been at a party with medical students? I've seen this before. You were drugged and you probably had a kidney removed. There's a strong black market in organs, and medical students pay for their tuition that way. Well, Larry had, needless to say, had to spend a few days in the hospital, and he's getting better. He was okay, but he was still worried about Susan. Did he get dumped? Or did something bad happen to her? So when he got out of the hospital, he went back to his red Corvette. He'd left parked near the party. And he noticed back on the passenger side and the back seat side, there was a hook hanging off the door handle, a bloody hook. He picks it up, throws it in the bushes. And this just can't get weirder, he's thinking now. But he's now even more worried than ever about what happened to Susan. So he drives to that big gray house at the corner of Cedar and Milvia. And an old man who looks like he's about 90 answers the door. And Larry says, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I met a girl named Susan a few days ago at a party who said she lived here, and she disappeared when I was driving her home, and I was in the hospital for a while, but I'm really worried about her. The old man said, I've been waiting for you. This happens every year. Someone comes and tells me the same story. In truth, Susan died in 1982. She was on the way home from a frat party, and she never made it home. It was a car accident at the corner of Cedar and Shattuck. Now, every year since then, somebody comes over at this time of year and talks about meeting her at a party. Now, young man, I know this is hard to understand, but she is buried at Mountain View Cemetery in Piedmont, and she's near the pond if you want to go see her, but her grave. He said, but I'm really sorry, young man. So now Larry is freaking out. How can that be? She was so beautiful and fresh and lovely, but he's got to verify this. He drives up to the cemetery in Oakland. It's a beautiful park, big trees. And he drives up to the area above the pond. And on a gravel path, he saw a grave that caught his eye. The grave said, Susan Carter, 1964 to 1982. And on a headstone, there was Larry's worn leather jacket. So like I said, this is 100% completely true story. And if anybody asks you where you heard it, well, you heard it from me and my neighbor's brother-in-law who heard it from his yoga teacher who had a twin sister who knew Larry's mother. And now you've got it from me and I wouldn't lie to you.
All right.
All right. How many?
How many? Oh gosh.
Urban legends.
The hook, yeah. The crash, yeah, the medical, right. Well, I got 3 out of there.
Okay.
There's a lot more.
There were 4.
There are 4.
Well, what's the 4th one?
Well, let's see. I always get this messed up, but there's the disappearing hitchhiker, which is Susan. There's the $65 car, red Corvette. Let's see. There's the
I don't remember that one.
The hook.
The hook.
And the hook, yeah.
And the stolen organs.
And the stolen organs, right.
And the yellow dress.
Oh,
Yeah, I just sort of threw that in there. Usually it's a white dress, but I just sort of saw her more Berkeley, flower child kind of thing.
Yeah, good job.
Excellent storytelling. And I'll tell you what, boy, so many images. You're thinking of your first kiss, the first time you might have leaned in for a kiss or tried to receive a kiss. And the bloody hook. I love the bloody hook. All right. And Eagles, Hotel California.
I know, man.
And I know when David comes on, he plays music. And it'd be interesting to see what he comes up with here. All right. Well, thank you very much. That was a great way to start the program. And our next storyteller is David Schmidt. He is representing the storytellers of San Diego. And many of you have probably seen him. He's been on here a few different times, over at least once or twice a year since we've had this, with always interesting stories and from a background of traveling and being in the Egyptian land of the dead and the mountains of Peru and Mexico, and just gathering stories, legends, and all kinds of stories. And David speaks 12 languages, I think it is, and spends his time between San Diego and Mexico City and just gathering lots of stories. And he's produced a book that is entitled Holy Ghosts, True Tales from a Haunted Christian College. Is that correct?
Yeah, in California, actually, not in Chicago.
Yeah, in California. So please welcome David Schmidt.
Thank you. If you ever go in the woolly swamp, well, you better not go at night. There's things out there in them old woods make a strong man die of fright. There's certain places in this world that sort of make you question everything that you think you know about the world around you. Certain places that seem to bend the laws of physics and time and science, and well, they just make you question what you think is real in this world. There's things that crawl and things that fly, things that creep around on the ground. And they say the critters and all the ghosts get up and they walk around. But I couldn't believe it. I just had to find out for myself. Couldn't conceive it. I never would listen to nobody else. Couldn't believe it. I just had to find out for myself. Well, there's some things in this world you just can't explain. Nancy was driving with 4 of her friends. They had just gotten off a soccer practice in Chula Vista, California, right south of San Diego. And Nancy was driving the car. She was driving all 5 of them home that evening. It was one of those winter months in California. You know, it doesn't snow in Chula Vista, but it gets cold. And it was one of those winter months where the days start to get short. The sun goes down real early, shortly after soccer practice. And the sun was just starting to dip down right now while Nancy was driving her friends home. She was in the car, and next to her was Amy, her BFF. That's what kids call your best friend forever. And Amy was right next to Nancy and sitting there, and the whole car, it smelled like cleats and sweat and fresh grass. And they're driving along on their way to Amy's house first. You know, Amy lived in one of those McMansions on the outside of Chula Vista, kind of on the farthest eastern edge of Chula Vista before it all becomes wilderness. And so Nancy's driving, and Amy says, "Hey, Nancy, did you grab one of the handouts for Mr. Winter's class for our homework, the essay we have to write?" Oh, God, are you kidding me? Did anybody get one of those things? Did anybody take one? No, the 3 girls in the back, they shook their heads. You see, Nancy, she's the responsible one. She was a little more mature than her friends, a little smarter, and it's frustrating when you're the smarter one, when you feel like you're the most mature person in your class. It's frustrating when you're the one who has to pick up the slack for everyone else. You're the one who has to drive everyone around, especially when you're the only one who has a car. So Nancy said, "All right, I've got it here somewhere." She found the handout, and she gave it to Amy because she's the responsible one, of course. She's not going to read this thing and drive her car at the same time. So Amy took the paper, and she read it out to the other girls in the car. "All right, we have to write an essay about this." It's Robert Louis Stevenson. It's a quote. We have to write about it. "Some places speak distinctly. Certain dark gardens cry aloud for a murder. Certain old houses demand to be haunted. Certain coasts are set apart for shipwreck." God, that's a morbid quote. That's creepy. Nancy said, "Yeah, you know, I think Mr. Winters, he's in a dark mood lately. It must be because he's going through a divorce right now." And all the girls kind of laughed. And then Amy said, "You know what? That quote, that whole thing about places that just call out to be haunted, that they're bringing darkness and weird things to them, that sounds a lot like a place right here in Chula Vista. That sounds a lot like Proctor Valley Road. And Amy kind of rolled her eyes. She said, oh, they're going to start up with this again. The other girls, one of the girls in the back, she'd never heard the stories about Proctor Valley Road. So she said, what do you mean Proctor Valley? It's just, we're on Proctor Valley Road now. This is just a normal road, right? Amy said, yeah, this part of it is right here with all the houses and all the tract homes and parks. But she turned around to look at the other girls. Haven't you heard the other stories about the other part of Proctor Valley Road? Once you drive past all the houses out there in the wilderness? Well, that same girl, she shook her head. Amy said, you know, they say there's a creature out there. There's a monster. It's 7 or 8 feet tall. It walks on 2 feet just like a human, but it's all covered in long, shaggy hair. And Nancy, she's just holding the steering wheel, trying to control herself, trying not to say anything sarcastic, but she's thinking, you got to be kidding me. You're just rehashing the old Bigfoot legend. That's a story from up in the Pacific Northwest. There's nothing like that here in Chula Vista. So then one of the girls from the back seat, she said, yeah, I've heard about that monster too. You know, they say that they say he goes and he attacks livestock and he like cuts their bodies open and he takes the organs out. And Nancy said, oh God, now you're mixing it up. That sounds like chupacabras, she thinks. That's a whole different legend. One of the other girls, she says, I heard the monster has got horns on its head so he can kind of disguise himself with the cows and camouflage. And Amy thinks, oh my God, now you're thinking of the Minotaur. And one of the other girls, she says, I hear that the monster can make your cell phones not work and make electronic stuff not work. And Amy's thinking, now they're thinking of UFOs. They're mixing it all up. So finally, Amy, she kind of slowed down and she turned around and she said, you've got to be kidding me. You can't be serious. You don't actually believe that crap, do you? Well, Amy looked at her BFF. Amy said, you sound pretty sure of yourself. And Nancy said, yes, I am absolutely sure of myself. I am absolutely sure there's not a big Bigfoot monster that's also a chupacabras and also a minotaur and also a UFO living out in the little wilderness just past Chula Vista, California. Yeah, I'm sure of that. Amy said, okay, cool. You want to test it out? Nancy said, what do you mean test it out? What are we going to do? Go out and set monster traps out in the desert? How would we test this? Amy said, no, there's a way to test it out. You see, the way I heard the story, there's a way to make the monster come to you. You have to go out there when it's dark, and the sun's almost down already. It's getting dark. So you drive out into Proctor Valley, and you drive out in your car, and you have to turn off your car and turn off all the lights and sit there in the dark car. And if you do that, they say the monster will come to you. Now, the girls in the back, they kind of made a little funny noise. But Nancy said, you know what? Let's do it. Let's do it tonight. Let's do it right now. Let's test it out. And Amy said, okay, fine. Fine, drive past my house. They were getting to those McMansions on the outskirts of Chula Vista. Amy said, let's drive. Don't drop me off. Let's all just drive out there and test it out. One of the girls in the back said, I don't think this is such a good idea. Nancy said, we're doing it. She had her hands on the steering wheel firm. We're doing it. I'm going to prove. But once we go out there and you see that there's nothing out there, I want apologies from each one of you for believing in these ridiculous stories. So Nancy kept driving down Proctor Valley Road. And sure enough, after a while, that asphalt has started to get real spotty. There's a lot of potholes. The car's kind of bouncing up and down. And then the asphalt just runs out. And you can drive out to Proctor Valley Road and you can test this yourself. And you can see for yourself if this is true. It's just a dirt, rutty road and it goes off into the desert. And the car is jumping up and down. And as they're driving along the stereo, there was some music on the stereo. But as they're driving on that rutty road, that music starts to kind of cut out. I just had to find out for myself. I couldn't believe. Never could listen to. Else I couldn't. Just had to find myself. And then it just went static, just fuzz on the radio. Now, the girls kind of checked their cell phones, and all of them said, no, I don't have any reception anymore out here. I don't have any bars at all. So they drove, and the car's bumping and bumping. Finally, Nancy said, you know what, this road is going to ruin my shocks. I don't want to drive any further. This is about as far as we're going to go. So Amy said, okay, fine, but you better turn the car around so you're facing back the way we came in case we need to make a quick getaway. God, Nancy said, "Are you serious? Okay, fine." So she slowly had to, the road's real narrow. It takes several turns to turn it the other way around, but she did that. Finally, she put it in park, turned off the engine, and turned off all the lights, and then they just sat there in the dark. Now, by now, the sun had gone all the way down. There was just a little glow on the horizon over there in the west by the city lights, distant city lights of Chula Vista. But, I mean, they could have been a million miles away from civilization. So they just kind of sat there. The radio didn't work, no music, no cell reception. So they just sat there in the dark, and they could just hear those desert sounds around them, hear the crickets chirping, hear the wind blowing through that chaparral brush. That's about all they could hear. And as they were sitting there, Nancy was sitting there, and this little flicker of a thought crossed her mind. The thought that when you are certain that there is no danger out there, that there's no monsters, there's nothing out there, well, then there's no harm in testing it out. But as they were out there in that dark desert, the other thought came in that said, if there's even a tiny little flickering of a possibility of something being out there, well, then it might be a very stupid idea to go test it out. They're sitting there, Nancy, she saw the glow of someone's cell phone in the back seat. One of the girls is checking her phone. She hears the girl say, "Still no bars. I'm getting bored. Can we go back already?" And Nancy, she looks in the rearview mirror and she looks at her friend, but then she thought wait, hang on. She adjusted that mirror. She thought she saw something else. It was a full moon and she could see that dirt road behind her. And she could have sworn there was some dark shape. She said, wait, shut up. There's something in there. And she looked at that mirror, and then she could hear something, this distinctive sort of pattering of feet running in the gravel in the road. And that dark shape, it's starting to get more distinct, and it's starting to come closer to their car. And then Amy says, "Crap, do you see that?" And Nancy said, "Yeah, I see it." And she starts to try to turn on the car. The car's not starting. Why does it always not start at these kind of moments? And she's trying to turn the key, and the engine's not going. Amy's saying, "Let's go, start the car." She said, I'm trying. And the other girl, one of the girls is screaming in the back because two of them are staring right straight through the back window, and they can see this figure. It's this tall, dark figure, and it's getting closer and closer to the car, coming right on them. Finally, vroom, the engine starts up. And Nancy steps on the gas. She peeled out this big cloud of dust behind her, and she looked in that rearview mirror. She could have sworn that she saw that figure still running after their car, slowly getting further and further away. Well, they drove down that bumpy road and finally got back to the asphalt, back to Chula Vista, and they got to Amy's house. And as they got to Amy's neighborhood to drop Amy off, all of the girls, they sort of started to forget what they'd seen, and they started to doubt their eyes and their ears, and they said, maybe we didn't see what we thought we did. Maybe it was all our imagination. Maybe that's it. So they got to Amy's house. Nancy got out to go help Amy with her backpack, and she got out. Nancy, she walked around the back of the car, and she screamed when she saw on the back bumper of her car these deep scratch marks, claw marks in the paint and the bumper of the back of her car. Now, those girls didn't ever go out to Proctor Valley at night again. Now, you might doubt what Nancy and Amy and the girls saw. You might doubt about those scratch marks on their car. But if you're in Southern California, or if you're ever visiting San Diego, you can go someplace and see one thing for yourself. The Bonita Museum, between Chula Vista and Bonita, south of San Diego, they have a plaster cast of a giant footprint that somebody collected out there in Proctor Valley. Now, whatever or whoever left that footprint, it's not human. It's too big to be human. The big toe veers off away from the other toes. It's strangely shaped. Whatever that print is from, it's not a person. And they say that something out there in Proctor Valley, still out there. And I couldn't believe it. I just had to find out for myself. I couldn't conceive it. I never would listen to nobody else. I couldn't believe it. I just had to find out for myself. Well, there's some things in this world you just can't explain. Proctor Valley Monster.
Well, I was going to go to San Diego, but I think I might not right now. Although I'm kind of curious, maybe I'll check out Proctor Valley.
Oh, he doesn't come into the city. You'll be safe. He's out there in the wilderness.
Nice. Well, an excellent job of the music. You portray those girls so well. I could see teenage girls there from your portrayal and your description. And that story, I mean, there's so many versions of those kind of stories that are, I know I grew up with them, and I imagine you've heard quite a few on your travels to different places. So thank you so much for that. Let's see, and the music especially was added a nice touch to it. All right,
Thanks.
well, it looks like, thank you, David. Our next storyteller is new to our group. Her name is Chris get it right? Lindstrom, and she's with the South Bay Storytellers, and she says that she is a software engineer in Silicon Valley, and when the pandemic was winding down, she wanted to find other outlets, other things to do. I'm not sure how she connected with South Bay, but I'm sure she probably knew Joyce or could tell us how that happened. But she's really interested in stories. And she says one of the weird things about her is that she has, if you came to her house, you get to see her cabinet with 40 frogs of all different kinds. And it looks like there's one right there. Oh, that's a really cool one. So another weird person coming on the line to tell us a story. Thank you.
So sadly, tonight's story does not include a frog, but it does have an aquatic creature. So our story begins 30 million years ago when the South Pacific plate brushed up against the North American plate to create the San Andreas Fault. And some places the earth went up, and in other places the earth went down. And in some of these depressions, water gathered. In one of these places, it was about a mile long and maybe 20 feet deep in the middle. Water gathered, and it became known as Lake Elizabeth, down by the modern city of Palmdale. It was genuinely a peaceful place. Animals drank there. The Native American tribes later gathered on its banks and traded with other tribes. The problem really only started, like so many things in North America, when the Spanish arrived. Junipero Serra, yes, that Junipero Serra, nicknamed it La Laguna del Diablo, the Devil's Lake. And there were rumors that the devil had put his pet in the bottom of the lake to make short work of anything that irritated him. The early ranchers just couldn't seem to make a go of the place. One of the early ranchers was named Chico Lopez, and he brought his foreman, also named Chico Vasquez. And after a while, they noticed that livestock, always livestock, never people, but horses, cattle, goats, whatever, their livestock periodically went missing. Now, I don't know why they didn't say to themselves, we are in mountain lion country, or we're in grizzly country, or even we're in cattle rustling country, and my foreman is the brother of the infamous California bandit Tiburcio Vasquez. But hey, why search for a mundane explanation that you might be able to do something about when you've got a perfectly good lake monster in the vicinity? Am I right? So one night there was this total hullabaloo down at the lake, and all the ranch hands raced down to the lake, and they saw this creature that they described as having the body of a whale with wings of a bat and these strange thin leg things hanging off of it and churning up the water. So this being the 1880s, they all dragged out their pistols and had a one-sided gunfight with the creature. Bang, 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 bang. But the bullets, they just bounced off. And the men were so freaked out that they went back to the safety of the barn, where they discovered that 10, count them, 10 horses had just disappeared. Well, with all this livestock going missing, Chico and Chico just couldn't make a go of this ranch. So they had to sell. They sold to a man named Felipe Rivera. Now, Felipe knew about the lake monster, and for him, That was the whole point. He already had a contract with the local circus to sell the creature dead or alive for $25,000. That would be in today's money about $750,000. So Felipe was totally motivated to go find this creature, and find it he did. Just laying there in the sun, minding his own business. And according to Felipe, the creature had the face of a bulldog, the neck of a giraffe, bat wings, and who knows by now what the body of the creature looked like. But Felipe didn't waste any time. Again, it's the Wild West. He took out his pistols, bang, bang, bang. But the bullets just bounced off again. And the creature, stumbled off into the middle of the lake and disappeared. So later, Felipe went to the shore where he shot the creature, and he found these big plate-sized red scales. Sadly for Felipe, the circus was not willing to pay $25,000 for a bunch of scales. So without the money, he too had to sell the ranch. Now he sold to a man named Miguel Leones. Now you might have heard of him because he actually is a California legend in his own right. Okay, Miguel Leones was a 6'4" bear of a man from Basque country. When he died, he owned 10,000 acres of California real estate. His adobe house in the town of Calabasas is actually the number one entry in the Los Angeles County Registry of Historical Cultural Places. So he was a big deal, okay? The Calabasas Coffee Company named one of their coffee blends after him, his nickname, El Basco Grande, the Big Basque. Now, you don't get to own 10,000 acres of California real estate by being a sweet and gentle soul. Miguel Leones was known for treating trespassers and squatters with extreme prejudice. So when his livestock went missing, he said to himself, I don't care if it's a cattle rustler or a monster. He's like, this trespasser has got to go. So he went down to the lake, and I don't know what the creature he saw looked like, but he took out his pistols, bang, bang, bang. And of course, the bullets just bounced off. But unlike everyone else, El Basco Grande wasn't going to take that lying down. He started wading out into the shallow lake, and he took the butt end of his pistol and bashed the creature right in the head. And then for good measure, he took his fist and he punched it right in the eye. Well, the creature was kind of taken aback. I mean, he'd never had this kind of treatment before. So his little wings fluttered like a hummingbird, and the creature rose up out of the lake and was last seen flying away in the direction of Arizona. Now, at this point, we don't really know what happened to the monster. There are some guys in Arizona that said that they shot something that looked like a pterodactyl a few days later, but they couldn't produce a body or a photograph, so I'm a little dubious. I can for sure tell you that the monster did not return to Lake Elizabeth because last year at the end of the drought, the lake bed was dry and there was no monster in the bottom. I like to think the monster is hanging out in Sedona, with all the magic crystals, or, maybe exploring the world, eating gelato in Italy and veggie sandwiches in California. My advice to you is the next time you are out on your porch on a warm summer evening and you hear something large flying overhead, you should raise a cup of your Calabasas El Basco Grande coffee and be glad you are not a horse.
Oh, what a fun ending that was. Oh my goodness. Great story. Well, we're so glad you decided to move over from Silicon Valley and start telling stories with us. We enjoy, I so enjoyed your story. You have such good humor and energy. You really pull us into the story. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to be posting. I'll be looking up in the sky for that pterodactyl to come flying my way. Thank you so much for that. And the history lessons too. That was very interesting. Thank you so much. All right. So our next storyteller is someone that you've seen with us and probably many other places around California. She's a longtime storyteller with us, and she said that she has been telling stories since as soon as she could talk. Neshama Franklin. She's representing the Contra Costa tail spinners. And I would like to read what she said, something interesting about her. When I get home from work at night, I get into bed with a bone and a book, gnawing at the former and devouring the latter, two great pleasures. And I can just imagine that. And that's a great way to spend an evening. So thank you so much, Neshama, for coming here and sharing stories again.
So this is a kind of lurch from legends. I mean, legends have been with us forever. And I love this, all this contemporary stuff, but we're going back to days of Norse mythology, courtesy of Neil Gaiman, who just tells them like they are. So I suck down the treasures of the gods, and now I'm going to give it back to you. And it's all at the feet of Loki. I don't know if you know about Loki, but he is a trickster extraordinaire. But this is how it starts. I mean, first of all, there's Sif. She's Thor's wife. She is very beautiful. The most beautiful thing about her is her long, golden, flowing hair. One morning, Thor sat up in bed and he looked at Sif and he said, "What happened to you?" And she kind of groped her way out of sleep. And she looked very puzzled, and her hand went to her head and her scalp, just pink scalp. She said, "My hair!" And he said, "He made you bald." She said, "What do you mean, who he?" "Loki," said Thor. "When things go wrong, it's usually Loki. It saves a lot of time." And so he got up out of bed and he went to Loki's house, and the door was locked. And Thor opened it the way he does, into smithereens. And he picked up Loki by the scruff of his neck and he said, "Why did you do it?" "Do what?" said Loki, looking as innocent as someone like this can look. "Sif's hair." "Oh, that. Oh, I was drunk. It seemed like fun at the time." "Well, put it back." "I can't do that." "You put it back, or I will break every bone in your body over and over and over again." And he picked up Loki's little finger and he started to bend it. And Loki shouted, "Dwarfs! They can do anything." "Well, you better go see those dwarves," said Thor. And Loki, he has magic shoes to the side of the mountain where the sons of Ivaldi, very ingenious dwarf craftsmen, were at work. And he said, "There's a Brock and Atri on the other side of the mountain, and they are going to present to the gods. I mean, there's going to be a contest, 3 treasures, and the gods will judge and see who's best. And, they refer to you 3 as fumble-fingered idiots." "That's a lie," said one of the sons of Ivaldi. They looked kind of identical. "They're the fumble-fingered idiots. We can make better treasures. We have no problem going against them." "Well, good, said Loki. And one of those treasures you should make is long, flowing, golden hair that's ever growing." "Oh, we can do that," said one of the sons of Ivaldi. "Good," said Loki. And with his magic shoes on the other side of the mountain, and there were Brock and Atri, the other really ingenious dwarf craftsmen. And he said, "Hello, people. I hear that the sons of Ivaldi are making treasures for the gods. It's a kind of a contest. The gods will judge them. And, when they talked about you, they said, fumble-fingered idiots." And Brock looked at Loki and he said, "This sounds kind of fishy." "Oh," said Loki, "I just thought you ought to know." Well, said Brock, let's make this a little personal, said Loki. Yeah, if we happen to win, we get your head. We could do some interesting things with your head. Oh, said Loki. Well, may the best dwarf win. He looked cocky. He was smiling on the outside. Inside, he was scheming. He could not let Brock and Atri win. He was really fond of his head. So this is what he came up with. There, he had no problem with the sons of Ivaldi. He knew that they would come through. And there was Brock at the forge on the bellows. That's what he did. Atri was the craftsman. And he was working with a big boar. It kind of looked like a golden boar. And the forge door opened, and into the forge flew an enormous black, well, it was bigger than a fly, but it was very determined. And what did that fly do as Brock was on the bellows? He bit a vicious bite into one of Brock's hands. Did Brock stop pumping? Of course not. I mean, that's what his job was. And the boar was done, and then in came some gold, and that was fashioned into a beautiful arm ring. Keep pumping, you know what to do, said Atri. Yes, I do, said Brock, this is what I do. At that, the fly bit, and we know who that fly is because he can change shape. That fly bit him on the back of the neck viciously, so the blood flowed out, and Brock kept pumping, because that's what he did. And the ring was extracted, and in came a lump of pig iron. And Atri said, this is going to be my masterpiece. And about keeping the heat steady. You just keep pumping and pumping. Yes, that's what I do, said Brock. And what did that fly do? Well, he was pretty desperate at this point. He stung Brock on each eyelid, and the blood ran down, and Brock was essentially blinded. And he just took his hand off the bellows for a millisecond and took a swipe. And, Loki almost lost his life at that point. And then he continued pumping, and the forge door opened, and out flew the fly. And when Atri looked at what he had made, he said, this is substandard. I mean, it still has its powers. I don't know how it's going to go over. What happened? And Brock said, well, there's a fly, and he was vicious, and I couldn't help it, but here's hoping. And so now it's time for the contest. And there are the gods, 3 of them, sitting on their thrones, ready to judge. There is one-eyed Odin. There is red-bearded Thor. There's handsome Frey. And they say, well, what do you have for us? And on one side are the sons of Ivaldi with Loki at the ready. And on the other side, there's Brock, and he has his treasures hidden under a sheet. So the very first offering is to Odin. It's a spear. It's exquisitely carved. Now, the thing about this spear, explained Loki, is that it is unbreakable, and it always hits whoever you throw it at, whatever you throw it at. And this was very good news to Odin because he was very strong, and he had broken and lost a lot of spears, and because of that one eye, his aim was pretty funky. So he was very pleased. He said, yeah, this looks good. Now, the arm ring, remember that arm ring? That was presented to Frey. And the arm ring, was it to Frey? In any case, the arm ring fit beautifully. Oh, just magnificent. And he admired it. The thing about this arm ring, Loki explained, is that every 9 nights it drips another 8 identical gold arm rings. And you can give them out as rewards, you can stockpile them, you can give them as gifts. You'll be very rich. And he was very, very pleased. And then he said to Thor, look what I have for you. And he held up this beautiful head of golden flowing hair. Well, I have to check it out, said Thor. And he motioned Sif over, and she put it on her head, and she tossed her head, and she said, it's I think it's more beautiful than my original hair. It feels so natural. And she went off tossing her hair, showing it off. And Thor looked pleased. So Loki thought he had it in the bag because, that's the way Loki is. Now it was Brock's turn and he whipped off the sheet. And the very first thing he gave was this golden boar. And he said, this, I think he gave it to Frey. He said, this boar will pull your chariot faster than the fastest horse. This boar will never tire, and this boar's bristles will light up the path. Ooh, that sounded pretty good. Now, I actually forgot. I have to backtrack. What was the last gift that Frey got from the sons of Vivaldi? It wasn't what I said it was. It was, well, he wasn't impressed initially. It looked like a folded cloth. What, are you giving me a scarf? No, said Loki, you unfold this scarf and out comes an enormous, magnificent ship with sails, and there's always fair wind in the sails. It'll take you wherever you want to go. When the voyage is over, you just fold up the cloth. You can put it in your pouch. Frey was pleased. So now we have Brock, who has presented the boar. And what is the second thing that he presented? My brain has gone blank, but whatever it was, he was pretty pleased with it. And now it was time to present that supposed masterpiece to Thor. And he looked at it, was a hammer. He said, the handle looks kind of short. And Brock said, yeah, that was my fault. There was this fly in the forge that kind of stopped pumping for just a second. And yeah, but I should tell you what it's kind of cosmetic, because this is what this hammer does. This hammer is unbreakable. That was very good. Thor just broke everything with his huge strength. When you throw this hammer, it will go out and bring back whatever you threw it at. And that was very attractive to Thor, because he had lost so many hammers out there. And this hammer, it changes size. So you can take it out of your belt. And if you're going after something large, you throw it, it'll come back, then it'll shrink again. This sounds really, really good, said Thor. I think that this is very possibly the best gift. This can protect us from the frost giants. This can save the gods of Asgard. And all the gods started nodding. Loki said, well, what about the golden hair? Oh, it's very pretty, but this is what the gods really, really need. And then Brock, through his swollen eyes, he looked at Loki and he said, now I get your head. And Loki said, well, you can have it if you can catch me. And with his magic shoes, he went up, 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 and he was gone. And Thor looked at Brock and said, should we try the hammer? And Brock said, yeah, give it a toss. He threw the hammer, which returned with Loki right there. And Brock said to Loki, now I get your head. And Loki said, well, you can have my head, but you can't touch my neck. Those were the terms of our agreement. But that's impossible, said Brock. What can I do? And Thor said, he has a point there. But then Brock had a good idea. He was really very smart. And he whispered it to Thor, and Thor said, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. So he whipped out this strip of leather and he tied it around Loki's mouth. And then he took out a knife and started kind of stabbing at the leather. And then he says, it's not working. It won't penetrate the leather. And Loki said behind the leather, well, a little spell against knife blades will keep that from happening. But dwarves, they travel with their tools. So Brock whipped out an awl, punch, 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 punch. And he sewed through the leather Loki's lips together. And sure, it hurt. But what hurt more? Loki couldn't talk, at least for now. That was very, very painful. But the deal with Loki is for all the havoc that he does, there's some good stuff. Look, that's the way the gods got their greatest treasures. Very fine treasures indeed. So, you're most grateful to him when you hate him the most. You hate him the most when you're most grateful to him. That is Loki for you. Thank you. A legend in his own time.
Yes. Boy, thank you for Norse mythology. I very seldom hear that anywhere. I can't recall the last time I've heard anyone do that. And your descriptions are so vivid. And I am spellbound with listening to your stories. So thank you for sharing that, bringing Norse mythology to our stage. We appreciate it. All right, our next storyteller is Nick Smith, and he's from the Inland Valley Storytellers. And Nick and I have had a difficult time connecting. I had the wrong email for him, and so I don't know that much about him. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've been a storyteller here in Southern California for about 30 years. I was working for the Pasadena Library when I started trying to learn how to tell stories. And the first story concert I was part of was part of a benefit for a bookstore, of all things, that involved most of the African-American storytellers in Southern California trying to help a bookstore come back from a horrific fire. But the story I have for you tonight is a legend or it's the truth. It depends on who you ask.
All right. Okay, go ahead. Thank you so much.
Do I remember when it happened? Yes. It was the June after the priest in the church told us to get rid of all the cats, for they were obviously animals of the devil. We asked, how will we keep the rats and mice out of our homes? And that priest said, God will provide. Well, apparently what God felt like providing was many, many, many rats. You see, in normal times, the cats would kill the mice and the smaller rats before they were full grown. And the dogs in the town would kill the full grown rats. Cats are not foolish in their ways, and small and edible is much better than dangerous and tough, and dogs were willing to go after the larger rats. But with no cats, they all grew up, and the dogs were simply overwhelmed. And so were our homes, as the rats poured in and ate everything they could reach and threatened everything else. Now, we were a merchant town, and our finest fabrics had to go to covering the cribs of our children so that the rats could not climb into those. And none of the river barges would stop in our town because they didn't want to pick up a load of rats along with a load of cloth. For months this went on. As our money dwindled, our ability to make cloth for sale was limited, as I might say, because there's nothing worse than a rat running across the loom while you're making a pattern. But you see, there was a day when things changed, and it was in that June. And well, we didn't even hear him at first. What we heard was the sound of birds. Birds that don't normally fly together, birds of a dozen varieties and more, all singing and chirping their hearts out as they flew around a man walking along the road toward the gates of our town. He was an odd man, dressed like a teller or a minstrel, but he was playing some kind of a flute, a whistle, a pipe. And it wasn't until he stopped playing that the birds flew off in their natural directions. Well, as one of the headmen of the town, I went to see who this was and what this was about. And he said, I hear you have a problem with rats. Ah, I said, more than a problem. We're at our wits' ends, said the man. What will you give me if I can rid you of these rats? The rats, I would give you 1,000 of Frederick's gold coins. For King Frederick was the richest man in all Germany, and he was the one who controlled the currency. He owned most of it. Well, the man with the pipe in his hand said, "Done," and turned to walk away. And I said, "But wait, what are you going to do?" He said, "Oh, I'll be back tomorrow." Well, that wasn't much of an answer, but it was better than no hope at all, I suppose. The men in the tavern were laughing and joking, because how could a man with a musical instrument rid the town of thousands upon thousands of rats? The next day, though, he came back, bold as you please. And this time he walked up to the gates and said, "I'm ready to start work. Are the rats everywhere around the town?" And we said, "Well, yes, that's the problem." And he walked to the center of the town, right in front of that church where the priest was. And he began playing. And again, we couldn't hear his music. But what we heard was a sound of squeaking and scratching, as thousands upon thousands of rats began to pour out of every house, every stable, every warehouse in the town, and gather around the man playing the music. And as they gathered, he slowly walked to the pier where the barges would normally dock. And he slowly walked to the end of the pier as the rats chittered and squeaked and scratched and almost danced their way following him. And as he stepped to the edge, they ran past him and into the water and began to swim and splash, still to the tune of the music that they heard. And slowly, the thousands upon thousands of rats sank into that water. He looked, saw no more swimming rats, turned and walked back to the center of town. "Well," he said, "give me my 1,000 gold coins and I'll be on my way." And I said, "Well, it's not quite as quick as that. We have to send word up and down to the other trading towns to let them know that the rats are gone. They can send the barges down, we'll load them with the cloth, sell the cloth, and have your money." "How long will that take?" said the man. "Well, with no notice like this, it'll take most of the summer. I would say in 3 months, we'll have the full amount for you." 3 months? "Well, we have nothing else to give you except many tons of cloth, because that's how we make our living. We sell the cloth, we gather the money, we pay you. That's what we can do." "What would I do with cloth?" 3 months? You'll have 3 days. And if you do not have the money for me that you promised, I'll take what's worth that to me. Well, what else could we give him but money or cloth? And so we tried to tell him, "Please, just be patient, we'll pay you." He stalked away. He would not accept our hospitality or share a drink at the tavern. He walked away. We sent word up and down the river, but that takes time. The barges take time, the merchants take time. We hadn't even started loading the first of the barges to arrive when he came back. And he said, "Well, is my money ready?" "No," said, "we told you it would take as much as 3 months to have that much money for you. It's not like we have it sitting around, and we haven't been able to sell anything for months." You'll regret this, he said. And once again, he walked away. We loaded that first barge. It was a rich one because no one had bought our best cloth in some time, and this was everything we had made that we hadn't used to protect the children. But it was that night that we heard a sound again. Didn't hear his music. What we heard was the sound of small feet running and of children laughing and playing. And it was odd because the children were able to run out and into the streets through the doors of their homes. And when the adults tried to follow, those doors were locked shut, as if held in place, as if they were part of the wall. Oh, but we heard the children because they were having so much fun in the town square, and began to fear because what if he dealt with them as he had dealt with the rats? Oh, no one could be that cruel, not over just money. And so we were relieved at first when the children started going in a different direction. Not toward the dock, not toward the water. They began going toward the gates of the town. And so it was that all of the children who could move quickly, and there were a couple who could not, either from illness or injury. There were children who simply could not keep up with the running and dancing and playing. But the rest all left with the man off down the road. And it was not until we could no longer hear the sound of the children that we could even open our doors and go out into the streets. And when we ran to the gates of the town, there was no sign of them. Well, perhaps he was only holding them for ransom. Perhaps he was keeping them until we could pay. And so we kept selling the cloth up and down the river until we had gathered 1,000 gold coins, and we were waiting for him to come back. But he did not. We sent word up and down the river and along the roads to watch for him and watch for our children, to let him know that we had the money for him. For we were honest merchants, and we'd never cheat a man after making a bargain, no matter how hasty or how expensive a one. We never heard back from him. Some say that the children appeared in a far-off land, that the King of Poland was paying for colonists, that the people in a place later to be called Transylvania spoke German rather than the language of the other folks there. But the truth is, we never heard from or saw our children again. We had the money, though, and we used it to good purpose. Had that priest install a stained glass window in the church, one that told the story of how the rats were removed from our town and would remind us for all time that we'd lost our children as well. And we entered it into the books of the town so that all the town councils henceforth would know what had happened. But the children, oh, the children, for we never saw them again. And this is the tale as it's been preserved in Hamlin Town since the 13th century.
All right. Thank you for bringing that story to life again in such an interesting and first-person narrative. I enjoyed that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And How, where did you actually come up with that story? Have you told it for quite a while or
I've told it
that
for a
version?
while, but I did some research on it because when I started looking into the versions of the story, I realized that there was something missing, and that was the town itself.
Right.
Why would the merchants in a highly respected town, because they were a merchant town that far back, and they were the cloth merchants of a whole section of Germany, why would they offer money and not pay it? And it's because they didn't have the money on hand. In Germany at that time, cash was basically how you settled big debts. And so the only way that there would be a lot of money coming in would be to pay for large quantities of cloth at one time.
Hmm.
So did they have the money? Probably not, given the fact that there was the plague of rats. And then I
Right.
started looking more into the history of the town and some things about it, and whether there would have been silver or gold as the coinage. And weirdly enough, the King of Germany really was bringing gold coins into Germany as the upper end coinage because it was being minted in Italy. And so he was bringing gold coins in. They didn't start doing good silver coins until after this story took place.
Well, you bring up a really good point that as we craft our stories, the more research we can do around the topics that we are presenting, even if they're true personal stories, go to the time period and the historical records and see what you can pull up, and it will definitely enrich your story. So thank you so much, Nick, for sharing that. And I'm glad I've got to hear you. That's the first time for
Sure.
me
Just
listening
glad
to
you
you.
got the email through to me finally.
Finally, man. Okay, all right. So our next storyteller is a person that's been with us quite a few times. Her name is Bobby Kincaid. She's representing the mixed bag at Belmont. And I really can relate to this because Bobby is a back roads traveler, likes to fish and been through Colorado and Alaska, loves to haunt gold museums all over the place. And she gets a lot of her inspiration from her gardening, where she just seems to be able to take that in and just refresh her stories. And she started with SAC in 2000 and took classes at Dominican College. And some of you might remember that were fantastic. Gay Ducey was one of the performers. Michael Parent, who just recently passed away. I saw him out there. So please welcome Bobby Kincaid.
Hi, my story is called Lychee, the Serpent Slayer. A long, long time ago in 2000 AD, ancient China, Lychee was born in one of the small kingdoms. She was born to a rice farmer, and she was the last of 6 sisters with no brother. Well, she was out in the rice field working when she saw the magistrate and the sorceress with a cart pulled by a oxen drive up to her mother and father and her sister, who was 12. And her father turned the cart around, loaded the 8 bags of rice in it, and then magistrate and the sorceress left. And when they passed by Lychee, she said, "The worm will never get me." From the time Lychee was a baby, she had heard these stories of this serpent, actually a worm that would come down into the village and eat their chickens and their pigs and their all the animals. And sometimes he would eat a farmer or 2, and sometimes 2 or 3 of the magistrates. So she had a lot of stories. And this monster was supposed to be 80 feet long, white, slimy, with thousands of teeth, and he was treacherous. From that moment on, she was 7, she decided that she was going to kill it. So the next day, she went up to her father. Early in the morning, they did a field dance to protect their fields from invaders. She said, "Dad, I want to join you in the field. I want to learn how to do the dance." And he looked at her, he said, "No, daughter's going to do that. This is defense. This is hard." And the mother was there and she said, well, Father, I think that Lychee should be allowed to do this. You have nobody with you and it should be a companion. So Lychee worked and worked and she became very strong and agile. Well, the rain dragon was very good to the first sister, but he was not good to the second, third, and fourth sisters. They had to walk over the hills to live with an aunt. So the sorcerer and the magistrate would not feed them to this monster. So she was very sad about that. But then the next year, the fifth sister, when they turned 12 on the 10th day of the 8th month, they either had to have bags of rice or they would go with the magistrate and the sorcerers up to the worm's den. Well, there was enough rice for her. This time it was 12 bags of rice. So Lychee again saw the father load the bags in the cart and left. And she was really determined and she worked harder, get herself stronger. Well, her mother said to Lychee, well, you should go out and clean the rice shed now and the straw. It needs work. So Lychee went out there, and when she went out there, at the bottom, she found her father's sword and she said, oh, perfect, just what I need. So before anybody was up, she'd be practicing with this sword, pounding the rice hay, and sometimes she missed and hit a rice bag. And her mother said, hey, those rats are really getting big this year. But Lychee practiced and she went and she danced with her father. Well, it was her time. It was just about the 10th day of the 8th month. And she went down to her father. They were eating dinner and she bowed and she said, Father, I am going to slay the worm. He said, no, daughter's not. No, you're going to your Annie's across the hill over there. We have the bags of rice for you. The rain god was perfect, but no daughter of mine. Well, she started crying and she ran upstairs. Well, her sisters followed. They knew her pain and her agony, and they knew that she built up her life just to kill this monster. So she put on her oldest boots, she put on her oldest garb, and she wrapped her hair up and she took the bedspread off the bed and she ran out to the rice shack and she got the sword and she put the sword in there and she ran as fast as she could to the sorcerer's house and banged on the door. And the sorcerer said, who's there? And she says, it's Lychee. I've come to give myself to the monster, the worm. She said, oh, you're much too early, but come in. What do you want? She said, I want the reward given to my father and my mother for my sisters. And I want a pot, I want some honey, I want some rice, and I want some footstones and a silk dress for me and some boots. She said, we'll see about that. Just come on in, wait in this room. So while Lychee was waiting in there, she practiced with her sword and she prayed to the orange dragon, the white dragon, the green dragon, the red dragon, and the black dragon for help and strength. They were emperors of China at one time or another. And she would pray for them. And then pretty soon she heard a dog barking. And she went to the door and there was the magistrate. It was the night of the 10th day to the 8th month for the 8th month. And there was the magistrate standing there and he said, well, I brought a dog, snake-eating dog for her. And I brought a pot. And Lychee looked at it. The pot was rusty and broken. The rice was hard and moldy, and the honey was hard, and the flintstones were chipped. And he looked at Lychee and said, and you don't get a gown or some boots. It's just going to be ruined on you. And she said, but you are giving the reward to my mother and father. And she said, yes, we are. Chuckle, and they tapped stones and elbows. So she went to the room, got her sword wrapped up and put the rest of the things in that she needed. And the dog was a blessing. She knew him from the field. And she went as fast as she could out the door. And the sorcerer says, wait, I'm going to come with you. Well, Lychee wasn't going to allow this. So she walked faster and faster. And pretty soon the sorceress sat down and said, no, go on. You're so eager for your death. Go on. I'll just wait here. See what happens. So Lychee with the dog climbed up. And as she walked, she would put sticks into her bundle on her back. Pretty soon they got pretty high up that steep mountain and they started hearing moaning and the worst smell ever. And they climbed further and they entered a temple. It had 4 columns and it had a fire pit. And when they went inside, there was a cave and there was the worm. It wasn't as large as everybody said. It was 20 feet. It didn't have as many teeth, had little tiny legs. It was sleeping. So Lychee was very, very carefully. She took out the pot, put in the honey, put in the rice. Then she built the fire up around it. And then she took her flintstones and struck them. And the dog crept around to get the side of the serpent, the worm. And Lychee sat there thinking, praying to all the dragons to help her. Pretty soon the honey smell was so good that it masked that horrible smell of the beast and another kind of rotty smell that was there. And before they knew it, it woke up and it sprang for that pot of honey. And when it sprang for that pot of honey, it burnt its face, and the dog jumped on him and started chewing. And there was Lychee with her sword, and she said, "My first sister, my second sister, my third, my fourth, my fifth, and for me." And she slashed him all up, and the monster fell down splat. And she looked at it for a while, and then she edged across it, went into the cave, and she picked up the bones of all the maidens who had been eaten by this worm. And she put them in her bag, and she went down the mountain. And then when they got to the sorcerer's house, it was gone, and so was all the sorcerer's things. But she kept climbing down and down, and at about night, she came into her father's place, and she beat on the door, and her family was so happy to see her. They hugged her and loved her, and the dad said, "We have to go to down in the village." So he took Lychee, and when they got down there, they dong the bell, and all the farmers came in, and she announced what she had done and told them. And she said, "I brought the bones down to my friends, your daughters, so that you can bury them." And they were all so pleased with her. And about a couple of weeks later, the emperor of that little kingdom came, and he wanted her to be his queen. And she said, "No, no, no." He said, "Okay, I'll give dowries for your 5 sisters." And he gave her father some diamonds, and then he gave her some gold coins. And he said, "You can do with them whatever you want." And she thanked him. And some years later, she married a farmer that was in the next village, and they lived happily ever after. And I want to say to you, please keep the courage and the persistence of Lychee and battle the battles that you need to battle. And thank you very much. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now? All right. So thank you so much, and we will continue to fight those battles and as they come our way. That's a new story for me, so thank you for sharing that. All right. Well, our last storyteller of the night is Joy Swift. Many of you know her. She has been around for quite a while. She's been on the SAC board probably 100 different times. She is one of the founders of the South Bay Storytellers, and around 92 is, I think, when they started. And she has done a lot of mentoring of other storytellers. And that's something for those of us in this field that have been doing this for a while. We should really give back and try and mentor people. And I know for our Storytelling Association of California, we try and put on workshops and other events to educate people about the benefits of storytelling and the joy in storytelling. So please welcome Joy Swift.
Thank you. This time of year can be so magic for seniors in high school who looked forward to that prom. Oh, such a wonderful time to get to go to a dance and dress up and just spend your evening having a wonderful time and dancing. And Beth was so excited because Roger McGrath, the star football player of her high school, invited her to the prom. But there was one problem. She said, "Oh, Mother, what are we going to do? I know you don't have any money to buy me a dress, and I'm working after school at the fast food restaurant, and I just don't have much money." And Roger has asked me. I really want to look good and show off for him. Then her mother thought a while, and she said, "I have an idea. There's down near where I work, there's a secondhand store that really seems to always have some really beautiful gowns. Let's go and see what we can find." So they went down, and of course, everything looked beautiful to Beth. She had never had a beautiful dress, much less a ball gown. And as she looked, she found the perfect dress. It was red, and it fit her like it was made for her, fit her like a glove. And so she bought it and went home and was so excited and had her hair done. And Roger came and took her to the dance, and he thought she was so beautiful. And all the boys wanted to dance with her, but Roger said, "Oh no," and he filled her dance card, and he had every dance. But as the evening wore on, she began to feel tingling in her legs and her arms, and she became short of breath. And she said, "I think I need some air." And so they went outside and thought that would help, but it only got worse. And Roger said, "Beth, I think I should take you home. You really don't look very good. Look like you really feel terrible." And she said, Roger, I'm so tired. I can hardly stand up." And so Roger took her home, and her mother took one look at her and said, "Oh my, yes, we must get her in bed." And so Beth just fell across her bed, and her mother took her shoes off, but not the red dress, and covered her with a blanket. And she said, "Oh, Roger, I think she'll be okay in the morning. She's just so tired, and she was so excited to get to go to the dance with you. So she'll be all right." But the next morning, when her mother went to check on her, Beth was ghastly white and looked really wrong, and she felt for a pulse. There wasn't anything. So she dialed 911 and then dialed the family doctor who lived a few doors down, and he came rushing in, and he looked at her and he checked her over, and he said, "Oh, it's too late. We don't even need the emergency ambulance here at all. I'm afraid she's gone. And so he called the undertaker instead. And the undertaker came, and Beth's mother explained that, she really didn't have much money, so we really have to keep the cost down as much as we can. And the funeral director agreed and took Beth's body away, and at the mortuary, they started preparing her for a burial. And he looked at his staff and he said, "Don't bother with embalming this one. This is a charity case, and there'll be a viewing tonight, and she'll be buried in the morning." And so that evening, her friends came by and mourned and looked at the body, and then the casket was closed, and the mortuary was closed for the evening, except for the cleaning lady, who had her own key, and she came in and started working, and she had an interesting habit of opening those caskets that she knew were going to be buried the next day, and it was pretty easy to find jewelry, and so she always managed to get a little bit, and sometimes there was clothing that was interesting enough to steal. And there was Beth, and she found Beth there in that red dress, and she thought, that's funny. I think I've seen this red dress several times before, but it is so beautiful. I'm really sorry I sold it before. It's just great. And so she struggled and struggled and struggled and got the dress off Beth and closed the casket again and went about her work. Well, she finished her work.
This meeting is being recorded.
So her mother and friends gathered, and they took the coffin down to the cemetery. And they got to the cemetery, and suddenly they heard pounding inside the casket, and pounding and pounding. And her mother said, quick, open the casket, open the casket. And they opened the casket, and there was Beth. Stark naked, of course, but her mother managed to find a blanket somewhere and cover her. And Beth said, oh, it's so strange. She said, you know, I went to the dance and I had such a good time, and then I started feeling so strange, and then I was taken to the mortuary, and I could hear everything, but I couldn't talk and I couldn't move, and then the red dress was taken off, and I started to feel better, but then it was put on me again, and it got worse, and then somewhere again the red dress was taken off, but I still couldn't move for the longest time. And it was just now, a few minutes ago, that I could really move and make you hear me. I'm so glad. You would have buried me. And so, of course, the police were called, and they said, well, where did you get the red dress? And they told him about the store, the secondhand store. And they went down to the store, and they asked the owner, and he said, red dress, red dress. Oh, yeah. You know, that red dress has been here 2 or 3 times. It's always so beautiful. I never have any trouble selling it. Yes, I remember selling it. Well, I think the lady who brought it in to me, well, she's a cleaning lady. She cleans for several businesses around here. She may even clean for a mortuary, but I don't know, and I don't know her name. Well, it took 2 days before they finally found the right cleaning lady. And so they went to her house, and they knocked on the door, and this tired, haggard, grief-ridden man opened the door and said, yes, what can I help you with? We're looking for Rosemary Ross. Oh, you're too late. Rosemary Ross died. I took her for out dancing last night, a beautiful dance, and she had her hair done up, and she looked 18 again, and we had such a wonderful time, but then she died in the night. I don't know what to make of it. Well, quick, sir, tell us where she's buried so we can dig her up. Dig her up? We cremated her this morning.
Excellent. An excellent story told by our Regional Gem Award winner for her lifetime achievement in storytelling and giving back to our community. What a great way to end our evening. So Andrew, can you just bring up all the storytellers, and we'll all, everyone who can, unmute and give them a round of applause or the wave. And then if any of the storytellers have anything they'd like to share about an event they've got coming up or anything, just go ahead and do that. And then we can go with any of the audience members if they have some kind of an event they'd like to share. So any of our storytellers, do you have something coming up you would like to tell us about? Go ahead, David.
Well, the story I told is part of a series of local lore that I've been collecting into a series of books on ghost stories and other legends from Southern California, especially the Temecula Valley area, which is a place with a lot of lore and no books about that area. But the upcoming book in the series, which will be book number 4, will be about all local stories of Bigfoot type legends, humanoid type monsters, and there's surprisingly a lot of them in Southern California. So I'll put a link to the series in the chat here, but y'all can feel free to check it out. Haunted Temecula Valley is the name of the series.
And what is the? I know I only knew of the one Christian college haunted stories. You have 2 other ones besides that?
Oh yeah, that bio is super old. I have like a dozen books on Amazon now. Most of them are stories. Most of them are ghost lore and stories, mostly of the creepy variety.
Nice. Okay, so yeah, his name is up there, David Schmidt. You could look him up too and check out the chat. Anyone else? Bobby, why don't you promote your book?
Well, I'd love to, but I'm going to take it off the market in May. It's not the bestseller. It was called Damsels Overcome, and it had 22 folk tales that inspired me to be who I am. I call myself a being. I came from a very white male environment, and I had to overcome that, which isn't hard. It took me probably till age 60 to realize all the propaganda that's fed to young girls during my period of time. I'm 80, and so I think I'm going to basically retire. I've done a lot of storytelling in lots of wonderful places, but Damsels Overcome's going to go by the wayside. So thank you, Ed. Thank you, Ed, for that. But
all right,
it's
okay. Anyone else have anything that they want to promote or tell us about? I see.
Ed, are you going to talk about the festival this weekend?
I was going to have you go ahead with that.
Oh, well, the very first Sacramento Valley Storytelling Festival is this weekend, May 20th. The main concert will be from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Willie Claflin will be a featured teller. Corey Rosen will be, and Claire Hennessy will also be featured tellers. We're going to have a couple of workshops at the beginning of the day, which starts at 1 o'clock. And then there'll be some regional tellers to highlight the talent we have in this area. And then there will be an open mic session as well. So I hope you can make it, support the whole, if you're in this area, support the storytelling culture over here, because it is a representative of our culture today. And we really want to continue to promote that. All kinds of different stories, personal stories, poetic stories, traditional stories will be there as well. So we are going to have a full mix, and it's going to be very entertaining. So I hope you can make it.
And the flyer, as SAC members, you all got a flyer, but it's on the SAC website. And you can also go to the Sacramento Storytellers Guild to find out about our events, including that one. And
Yeah,
Sarah, can you tell us anything about the Bay Area Festival, how that went for you?
Oh, sure. Thanks. It went really well. It was a lovely experience. Many of you were there. Thank you so much. And we're planning for next year. Save the dates, May 3rd and 4th. We'll be in Santa Rosa at the Sonoma Academy. So we'll be starting to plan. We already have started to plan for next year. And if you'd like to help us in any way, let me know. We always need folks to help us. Thank you.
You're welcome. And next month, the genre is this will be almost the end of our 3rd year.
Yes.
We have fantasy fairy tales in June. We have one more spot open, so contact me and let us know. And then in July, we have humorous stories, and we only have one sign up for that. And all of you, then we start our series all over again with, it'll be the 4th year, personal stories and folk tales and spooky stories, so forth and so on throughout the whole year. And you can look at the website and see all those genres. And if you've received any of the flyers, they have all the genres, and you can let your swap leader know, I want to be chosen for next December, Sacred Stories. It just, so if we can get information ahead of time, it just makes the process easier. So please think about that and definitely keep on attending these genre events. We appreciate your participation and attendance. And I think that's it, unless anyone else has anything they want to add.
Well, I just want to say again, thank you to Ed and all the tellers, and Andrew. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.